Yeah, as you know, we say jumbo here in the Serengeti Park. A very warm welcome from me to today's and this year's conference. A huge and from the heart meant thank you for the participation. This year we were really trembling because my wife and I saw that exactly in these days we have a huge EASA meeting and a conference also going on. So we thought we would be like with 3 participants. So we're very happy and grateful to have even 2 more participants than last year between online and in presence. So thank you so much for coming, for giving this conference the importance that it has, and for believing in the vision that we carry out and we want to spread out with this conference. A huge thank you to the team of our biologists, my beloved wife. You should see how it runs at home. Kids get hit on the head to go to bed, so that my wife till at least 2 o'clock last night in the morning, all the abstracts had to still go out and the last thing. So a huge effort. Thank you so much also to you all. A couple of words from me. Dr. Fabrizio Sepe, CEO and owner of the Serengeti Park. My wife, Ido, is since 7 years host of this conference in which we believe deeply to create network, to create awareness all around the world. It's an international conference and we're very, very happy and proud of this. And in times where we see missiles flying and Trump acting out like a 5-year-old child, banging on the table and stamping with his feet, I think every conservationist that is in us, in this room, probably more than anywhere else outside, everybody knows when missiles fly, not only people die, but also animals and biodiversity, and it's terrifying. Even if it's cats, mice, and dogs, or some horses that get hit, but they also die. And I find it terrible that nobody even mentions that closely. In times like this, we have to stand even more firm and strong in our vision and in what we believe, and stand very, very strong together and get awareness of what we are doing here. And the fact that despite all the other distracting things like the EASA conference, for example, the attendance is so great, shows that it is infinitely important what we do. And I wanted to bring an example. I don't know if you knew this, that there was an athlete called Roger Bannister. Did somebody ever read about this story? Yes, that he broke finally after something like 90 years the running of the mile under a minute, the famous mile under the minute. 4 minutes, sorry, 4 minutes. And astonishingly enough, in an era where there was only radio, no television and nothing, a couple of months later, athletes all over the world started breaking this freaking record. And so scientists started to say, well, what the hell is going on? Why is it that in India this crazy guy just did it also, and in Brazil and wherever? And it actually showed the famous entanglement theory, which in our days is so complexly explained by quantum physics. So I wanted just to give this message that everything that we're doing here has an incredibly positive energy, and it's going out there. And people probably now in Brazil, instead of dancing samba or after 3 caipirinhas, are probably debating why this one species of parrot or of monkey is not being seen anymore, and are debating about biodiversity. And that I find as message and to give you energy for these next days, mostly for the gala night, because I saw you dancing many times, and it's crazy. But no, to give you the energy and the vision of a bright future that we still definitely have, because if we go into a perspective out in space, yes, the missiles are flying, but it's on a very small spot of the planet. The media concentrates, obviously, it's their job mostly on these bad things and people dying and bleeding and airplanes getting bombed and missiled at. But there are so many other parts of the world doing great, doing positively, doing strongly. And this Hodenhagen, little part of the world, little mosaic stone, is also doing well from today. And I wish you a very, very successful conference. Thank you very much.
Now it's a little better. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our invited speakers, presenters, and conference delegates, both here in person and online. Thank you, Fabrizio, for a wonderful welcome speech, and I appreciate your patience and understanding when this becomes the Super Bowl for the year for the research department, for me, the committee. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the 6th International Meeting on Zoo Research, Conservation, and Biodiversity. I'm Azogu-Sepe, as you all know, and I'm the head of the research department here at the Serengeti-Park. I have the honor of being your host today, along with my colleagues Ruth Marie Stecker. If you want to stand up, Ruth. You met her yesterday, and as well as Philip Martins, yes, and Karina Kochmeyer, and our honorary committee member, Angelica. So just a few housekeeping rules. We will notify presenters when their presentation is going too long. We would have like a paper that says 5 minutes or 2 minutes. We will also have some Q&A. So for you all, please allow some time for that. If you're speaking for 20 minutes, know that 20 minutes includes your Q&A. If you're speaking for 15, know that it includes Q&A. For the conference badges, you are welcome to take them home. If you want to leave them behind, maybe just the holders, you're also free to do so. Okay, so some of you have seen this portion of my presentation. It's just revised a little bit, but it's always important to introduce everyone to the IMZRCB. Oh, Fabrizio has to go, so bye. Love you. So we want to have fun. Fun is the #1 thing, because when someone's having fun with what they're doing, they are more passionate about it. So we want to have fun. We want to be able to interact with each other and network, and we also want to be engaged in the topics. So we, as a goal for the conference, are wanting to raise awareness towards conservation issues and biodiversity changes. We would like to enhance zoo education and outreach for the Serengeti Park, which is in part why we created this conference in 2020. We want to highlight the role of zoos and aquaria in the conservation and support of biodiversity. And we want to give people the feeling of a concrete contribution to the world. Obviously, at the end of the day, you also want to be an event that people would want to come to. So we also are prepared and are creating an intimate setting for you all to come together and meet and not be in a huge crowd where you just feel like one person, and despite being surrounded by a lot of people, you're alone. So we don't want to give that feeling. I hope that we're managing to remove that from this event. Okay, and yeah, our first event was in 2021, so we are in the 6th. And I want to give you a little bit about the Serengeti-Park Hodenhagen. So we have been opened in 1974, as Ingo mentioned yesterday during the elephant tour. We are an animal and amusement park, and we have approximately 200 hectares here. We also have lodging, so most of you are staying in the lodges. We have unique rides, so when the park opens on Saturday, if you're staying a little longer, you'll be able to enjoy that. We have various shows, kiosks, and souvenir shops. There are 360 themed lodges here in the park. So these are just a few: the Tongasoa, the Jungle Safari lodges. You're in the safari lodges. We also have the Telt lodges and the ones in the Masai Mara where you wake up and you can see the giraffes and a mixed species exhibit. And we also have two main restaurants. So now you're in the Manyara. Yesterday you were in the Savannah. And we would have a new restaurant coming soon. If you've heard of the news where we received the Luftwaffe Airbus A310, it is now by the Masai Mara area. And yeah, we're really excited to turn that into a restaurant. So this might sound a little bit like advertising, and to some extent it is. But all of these efforts ultimately support the animals in our care. We are a privately run park, so we don't have public funding, which means that these features of the Serengeti-Park are an important part of how we sustain our work. All right, so more about the park. We are home to endangered and flagship species. We are up to 2,000 free-living species in our care. There are natural enclosures without barriers, so as you have seen a little bit during the safari tour. We also have increased educational opportunities for the public to be able to raise awareness, and we also have unique research opportunities through our internship program and support of external research requests. So for an example, we recently had a student last year. She worked on the Red Panda project. Her name is Marion Yaustra. She took part in a 9-week internship to conduct behavioral observations on our pair of Red Panda, George and Kuzi. She will be here online to present her work. So she also looked at the effect of the Light Festival. We just had the Lichter Fest, and how did it impact the red pandas, if at all. We also have the Pygmy Hippo project, which was conducted by Sarah and Beatrice in the corner. They were kind enough to come back to be able to share the results of their work, so they will be doing a presentation on that. It was for their master's thesis, and they were also supported through the research department and an Erasmus Plus program. All right, so every year we have a flagship species support program. So last year was the Pygmy Hippo with Sarah and Beatrice. This year we want to work on a giraffe project. It would be comparative movement ecology and space use of northern and reticulated giraffes in a multi-exhibit safari setting. Every year we want to be able to raise awareness and help to preserve a particular species in any part of the world. We also want to now include the research component. So we have an incoming student, and we're also seeking external field cooperations. So that's all in the works, and we have our silent auction that we are hoping to raise more funds to be able to support purchase of equipment and support the student as well. So we have 2 species of the giraffes in our care. We have the northern giraffe, so subspecies are the Nubian and the Kordofan. They are critically endangered. We also have the reticulated giraffe, which is endangered. So we want to study the impact of environment, of the mixed species exhibit, on their movement and spatial use of their enclosures. Okay, so I'm just gonna go quickly through this. Part of the project is looking at the spatial and movement ecology. We also look at the behavioral and social dynamics in relation to how they use their space and habitat complexity. We would also look at the welfare indicators such as physiological measures, the influence of environment, because they are in areas where visitors drive through. And we also, I don't have, in any case, by serving as ambassadors here in our park and in allowing us to raise public awareness, we are also helping to communicate and share the education to everyone else that are able to join us. Okay, so in 2026, our conference theme is Engaging Minds, Saving Species. Engaging Minds is the first step towards protecting our planet's future. So by speaking about the topics, by sharing curiosity, by sparking knowledge, by connecting with each other and networking and inspiring action. We actually empower individuals to champion these issues. So every idea exchanged here and outside, every connection made, it brings us closer to saving species and preserving the delicate balance of life on Earth. So together, we can inspire conservation through zoo science and public engagement, and we can shape a better future for wildlife. So these are some of our animals in our care, and some are endangered, and some are flagship species, and some are just normal animals, but it's always important to know that every life matters. For sponsorships, we just want to say thank you to everyone that has supported our silent auction, such as Dr. Paul Rose. He brought his book in yesterday. We also have Jens and Thoralf, who we saw signing the paintings. We also have Float Arts, our student Marion Yaustra, and to all others, Peter Pullman, a local Hodenhagen artist, thank you so much for your support. We also want to thank our anonymous gastronomy sponsors. They chose to be anonymous, so we are just really grateful for your support. We have, thankfully, a continued cooperation with the Journal of Zoological and Botanical Gardens. Sorana Repak is here. She will talk more about the journal, and they are supporting once more this year with 1,000 euros award. This we would split towards the best talk, the best poster online, and the best poster in person. So thank you so much. This is our 6th year of cooperation, and we are very grateful. Media partnerships, to those that advertise the conference, there's many more that I'm not able to add in here, but thank you to JZBG, thank you to the Conservation Journal, thank you to the zoo scientists, as well as EASA and the VDZ here in Germany. And then my last point is that we don't know yet when we want to hold the 7th conference. It will be next year, but we just don't have the date yet. But if you are interested, if you know people that would be interested, just to keep it in mind, you can also suggest speakers to us. If you say, hey, I've been around and I heard this person would be a really great contribution to your conference. So yes, we will let you know once we have a date set up. But yes, the 7th IMZRCB will be next year. So that wraps up my introduction, and we will now switch to our online presenter. She's our keynote today. Her name is Eugenia Chow. She is an environmental communicator and conservation advocate who focuses on inclusive approaches to conservation. Her work highlights collaboration with indigenous peoples and local communities to ensure ethical and sustainable conservation practices. She is known for translating complex conservation issues into accessible public engagement initiatives. So I met Eugenia on Instagram. I loved her work, and she is raising awareness as well towards conservation. So welcome, Eugenia. Thank you so much for joining us, despite all the issues that we had discussed previously. Welcome. You may start whenever you're ready.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me as the keynote speaker. I wish I could be there in person with all of you, but it really is an honor to be here and to be able to share my perspective. So today I'll be talking about inclusive conservation. This is a phrase that we're starting to hear a lot more now in grant applications, in mission statements, in conference keynotes, because funders are starting to require it and journals are asking for it, and NGOs are also promising it. But here's the question that I want to explore today, as it's something that keeps me up at night and I'm constantly thinking about. How do we actually achieve it? How do we move from well-intentioned principles, the words on the slide, to meaningful on-the-ground practice? And last year, I found myself in a world that forced me to confront this question every single day. Because for a year, I was working and living at a wildlife research center in Laikipia, Kenya. So what I witnessed there is what inspired me to talk about this subject today. So the title of the slide, Learnings from Laikipia, is intentional. I chose the title because this talk isn't about me arriving in Kenya with answers, but it's about what I learned and observed during this year working at this wildlife research center. And these are lessons that have fundamentally shaped how I think about conservation science, and partnership that I'm hoping to share with you today. But first, I want to be clear about my role. I'm not a tenured professor, I'm not an ecologist or a biologist, but rather, I'm a science communicator and an environmental educator. My job is to watch, to listen, and to translate between worlds, between researchers and the public, between data and story, between good intentions and on-the-ground reality. And what I noticed in Laikipia was this. International research teams would often arrive with funding, with equipment, with well-designed studies. A lot of teams would come and collect their data, sometimes over months, sometimes over years. But then they'd leave. And while they were here, they would engage in meaningful partnership, oftentimes they would leave without giving much back to the community, nor including them in their research process. On the other hand, the Kenyan rangers who knew every animal movement, who could read the landscape like a book, they were briefly thanked in the acknowledgements. The community members who understood the relationships between people and wildlife, who had names for every hill and watering hole, they were never invited to be co-authors. The research findings, the papers, the insights, they rarely made it back to the communities living alongside the wildlife. But I want to mention that this dynamic is not specific to Laikipia alone. It is reflective of a larger systemic issue that is rampant across research centers and the scientific community more broadly. And I kept thinking, if conservation is supposed to be for and with people, why does the process so often exclude them? And that question is what brings me here today. How do we move from well-intentioned principles of inclusive conservation to actual practice? And I want to start first by naming the systems that are currently broken. You've probably heard of the term helicopter science or parachute research. It's that extracted model where researchers, often from the global north, will fly in, collect samples or data, and fly out, publishing their findings back home without meaningful collaboration or benefit sharing with local communities. And the evidence is in the numbers. A 2025 study in Proceedings of the Royal Society looked at over 3,200 species descriptions. What they found was that 51% of species from the global south were described exclusively by researchers outside of the region. Yet for species in the global north, that number was just 0.6%. And what's interesting about these statistics is that the descriptions were actually more robust when local researchers were involved. So the assumption that global north researchers bring superiority analytical capacity is simply not true. But there's actually a newer, even more insidious form of this problem. A 2025 paper in Ecology Letters calls it remote control science. And this is different because it isn't just about physically extracting samples anymore. It's about holding decision-making power from afar. So in the case of remote control science, global north researchers retain control over scientific agendas, funding, methods, research questions, while local collaborators are reduced to marginal roles. They become field hands rather than intellectual partners in the research. And the paper that discusses and introduces this concept frames this as scientific neocolonialism. All of this to say is that conservation has never been neutral. It has always been about power, who gets to decide, who gets left out, and whose knowledge counts in making decisions. So what are the structural barriers that keep this power imbalanced? Drawing from a 2025 paper in Conservation Biology, I want to walk through 4 different challenges that we need to confront. The first one is linguistic bias. Currently, English dominates scientific publishing, but journals and publishers lack linguistically inclusive policies. This makes it harder for non-native speakers to read, engage, and publish, hindering their professional development from the very start. Research conducted in Spanish, Swahili, French, or Mandarin, and the knowledge embedded within these languages remains largely invisible to the global scientific community. The second challenge is undervalued contributions. We need more channels for dissemination because research conducted outside of traditional academia, by communities, by practitioners, by local organizations, currently lacks visibility and is consistently undervalued. And in many biodiversity-rich countries, the publish or perish culture is absent, which reduces the incentive to publish and leaves local experts consistently underrepresented in global science. The third is underrepresentation and extractive practices. When external researchers conduct studies without collaborating with local experts or communities, the research loses significance and relevance. It produces incomplete understandings that overlook cultural contexts and deepens the marginalization of the very communities it claims to study. Fourth and finally, capacity constraints and accessibility. A lack of infrastructure, from an unreliable internet to limited lab access, from journal paywalls to bureaucratic hurdles, prevents local researchers from engaging in international collaborations and contributing their knowledge to global scientific findings. And these aren't just individual failings, but rather they're systemic barriers. And these are centuries in the making and are inequalities that have compounded over time. Despite all these barriers, linguistic bias, undervalued contributions, extractive practices, and capacity constraints, Indigenous peoples and local communities own or manage at least 32% of global land area. And what's impressive is that 91% of those lands are in good or moderate ecological condition. 91%. Let that sink in for a little bit. So this means that the people who have been excluded from research agendas, left off author lists, and denied funding are the ones who are successfully stewarding nearly a third of the world's land. Indigenous and local communities are not the problem, they are the solution. Conservation has spent decades trying to exclude people when it should have been partnering with these communities. So if the barriers are real and the evidence is undeniable, then the question becomes, what do we do differently? How do we build partnerships that actually support the people who are already doing the work? And this brings me to the 5 pillars of inclusive conservation. Back in August 2025, I had the opportunity to attend the Inclusive Conservation Summit in Nanyuki, Kenya. This summit, which was co-led by Conservation International, Impact Kenya, IUCN, and a few other local partners, brought together a range of stakeholders to discuss the topic of inclusive conservation. Out of these dialogues with practitioners, community leaders, and researchers, a framework emerged based on 5 core pillars. Let's walk through them. Pillar 1 is autonomy over territory. This means the right for communities to achieve self-determination, the right to say no, the right to manage ancestral lands according to traditional practices and priorities. And this isn't just about land tenure, but it's about who gets to decide what happens on the land. The second pillar is leadership in governance. So this means not only do local and Indigenous communities have a seat at the table, but they hold an important voice in setting the agenda. When there's leadership in governance, local people are positioned as decision makers and not just participants or beneficiaries. As one summit participant put it, it is necessary to adhere to the needs and key priorities that come from the community. Not just what you think they need, but what they actually say they need. Pillar 3, benefit sharing and direct financing. This ensures that resources are distributed equitably. This ensures that funding flows directly to community organizations and not just through international intermediaries. The biological conservation paper notes that Indigenous communities currently receive only 0.4% of total philanthropic giving, despite the previous statistic that claims that they protect 90% of, they manage nearly a third of the world's land. And that is simply a case of extraction. The fourth pillar, respect for knowledge. Indigenous and local knowledge valued equally within Western science. Not as an anecdote to be validated by data, but as a distinct knowledge system with its own rigor and wisdom. A 2025 paper in the Journal of Agriculture, Food Systems, and Community Development makes this point powerfully. Indigenous knowledge must be treated as a distinct framework, not selectively integrated into Western science, but respected on its own terms. And Pillar 5 is respect for rights and customary institutions. So this means protecting cultural identity, laws, and traditions. Recognizing that conservation succeeds when it works with community governance, not around it. The same paper reminds us that Indigenous worldviews see humans as a part of nature, with rights and responsibilities not separate from it. And these 5 pillars of inclusive conservation are not just abstract ideals. They have to be the foundation of every partnership, every grant, and every research project. But so what do these pillars actually look like on the ground? At the Inclusive Conservation Summit, practitioners, NGO leaders, and community representatives wrestled with that exact question. All of us came together to ask, how do we translate these 5 principles into actionable strategies? And here's what people came up with. For the first principle, autonomy over territory, this means supporting communities in resource mapping that reflects their own naming systems and knowledge. Rather than imposing GIS coordinates from afar, sitting with community members and learning how they understand their land is crucial to conservation. It means helping communities to enhance legal literacy, understanding their rights and how to integrate their priorities into county or regional spatial plans so that they are empowered to stand up for themselves. It also means that ensuring that free, prior, and informed consent, FPIC, is not a checkbox at the start of a project, but a continuous process of dialogue and mutual agreement. Consent isn't a one-time event, but it has to be an ongoing relationship. The second principle, leadership in governance. This means actually adhering to community-defined needs and priorities. It sounds simple in theory, but it's rarely implemented in practice. Because it means that researchers and project managers have to set aside your project timeline, funding deliverables, and publication goals, setting that aside to listen to what the community actually wants. It means strengthening community feedback mechanisms so that power isn't just a one-way street. It also means actively working to reduce dependency on external stakeholders by building local capacity to lead, then stepping back and letting them take over. The summit called this promoting community leadership by reducing dependency on external stakeholders. For benefit sharing and direct financing, this means building capacity on fair, transparent benefit sharing modalities, helping communities understand valuation and negotiation so that when a researcher or NGO arrives with a proposal, the community knows what to ask for and how to stand up for themselves. It means practicing participatory budgeting, involving communities from the very beginning of project design, not just at the end when benefits are being distributed. It also means advocating for funding structures that allow direct access by local organizations, not just internal NGOs and gatekeepers. The summit notes also included a crucial distinction that we need to distinguish between benefits and compensation, because compensation is what you get for a loss, and benefits are what you share in from a gain. And communities must deserve the latter. It's also important to take stock of and evaluate the different types of benefits, because not all of them look the same, and community should have a voice in defining what benefits look like and mean to them. The fourth principle, respect for knowledge, means crediting Indigenous sources of knowledge, not just as a line in the acknowledgements, but authorship, co-authorship, direct verbatim quotes in reports, and citing that as valuable scientific knowledge. Researchers can better acknowledge and credit Indigenous knowledge through validation workshops, incorporating direct quotes, and supporting communities to develop mutual agreements or terms of reference for ethical research before it even begins. It means supporting the documentation of indigenous and traditional knowledge and embedding this into conservation education in schools, in community outreach, and in training materials. And crucially, it's essential to ensure that adequate compensation for indigenous and traditional knowledge is given, not just as an acknowledgement, but also as a payment. For the respect for rights and customary institutions, this means supporting continuous ethnic community dialogues and barazas, which are public meetings where information is shared in local languages and formats. It also means formally recognizing and documenting the roles and responsibilities of indigenous systems and customary institutions, and recognizing them formally in project governance. It means two-way capacity building, outside researchers learning for community governance just as much as communities are learning from external science. The summit called this self-strengthening of communities, which means reducing external dependency so that communities can lead on their own terms. One working group also emphasized that promoting social inclusion involves engaging community gatekeepers and recognizing that communities themselves have internal dynamics, and inclusion must reach women, youth, and other marginalized groups. One participant at the summit said something that really resonated with me, and they said, conservation is often framed as a Western term, yet pastoralists and traditional communities have practiced stewardship for generations. One of the biggest takeaways is that we don't need to teach communities how to conserve. Instead, we need to be learning from the stewardship that they've been practicing all along. Another participant offered a reflection that not everything that matters can be quantified, and we need the humility to sit with that. Achieving inclusive conservation requires a collective approach. No single group can do this alone, and everyone in this room where you're sitting has a role to play. For example, researchers and academics. This can start with early and deep involvement of local scientists, so involving them from the start as co-leaders, not just as participants, and jointly creating a research agenda that benefits all parties. Fair authorship recognition means moving people away from acknowledgements to the author line, and if the research couldn't have happened without them, then allowing them or enable them to be co-authors in this project. And capacity building and knowledge sharing is also important, so being able to host joint training programs, exchange visits, mentorship networks, and better funding structures that allow local sciences to lead and not just implement projects. The paper also talks about citing broadly, so proactively including research from underrepresented regions and using translation tools to access work in other languages and the knowledge that's embedded in those languages, and also disseminating locally. So even if research is not available to the community where it was, ensuring that research is available to the community where it was conducted. For institutions, universities, zoos, and research centers, establishing liaison roles and creating spaces for people whose job is to bridge researchers and local communities to build relationships and not just collect data. Because the conservation biology paper emphasizes that these roles leverage diverse talent pools and advocate for policies that support inclusion. And when it comes to implementing equitable policies, this means allocating resources for inclusion training, supporting international researchers with visas and language, as well as prioritizing collaborative projects for funding. And valuing diverse outputs means that a community workshop or a local language field guide should be valued alongside a journaled article in promotion and tenure decisions, because these are equally, if not more, valuable forms of knowledge, documentation, and sharing. As for publishers and journals, multilingual dissemination can help to reach more people, and offering multiple languages can lead to more open access translations. Removing financial barriers, because authors in lower income countries often cannot afford publication fees, so expanding waiver eligibility and making it more inclusive for people to participate in the scientific approach. Codifying ethical standards means requiring evidence of community participation and clear co-authorship guidelines, and demanding transparency about collaborative structures and diversifying editorial boards to reflect geographic diversity. Because we can't have inclusive science if the gatekeepers all come from the same place. For funders, which includes foundations, governments, and NGOs, require co-leadership. Because funding agencies can and should require grants that have co-leads from the Global South. Rather than requiring Global North partners to be the lead, funding local organizations directly and strengthening research networks within the Global South. Demanding equitable partnerships, especially when reviewing grants, asking questions like, who is really leading? How are benefits being shared? And making inclusive practices a funding requirement and not just a checkbox. And investing in capacity building to fund training, exchange programs, and long-term research schools in the Global South. Because having these long-term ecological research networks are beneficial for creating real opportunities for leadership, and we need more of that. And finally, for NGOs and CSOs, promoting community-centered research. The role is not extraction, but facilitation. So helping communities benefit economically helping communities benefit from this research and making it a space for mutual and two-way learning. Helping communities benefit economically from conservation by connecting local projects to the global market. Advocating for pro-community policies, using influence to push for legislation that promotes community rights, and documenting and validating Indigenous knowledge, then returning it to communities in accessible forms. Helping communities to develop mutual agreements for upholding ethical research and ensuring, again, adequate compensation for Indigenous knowledge, and not just acknowledgement, but compensation. One working group also stressed the importance of facilitating forums and dialogues between investors, policymakers, researchers, and communities, because these groups often talk past each other. And documenting best practices of Indigenous and traditional knowledge to promote good governance so that communities can learn from each other and not just from external experts. So we've introduced a framework, 5 pillars for genuine partnership: autonomy, leadership, benefit sharing, respect for knowledge, and respect for rights. We've gotten practical, specific actions for every stakeholder in this room, drawn from the latest research and from practitioners on the front lines. But these frameworks and action plans mean nothing without the choices that you make when you return to your institutions, your labs, your funding communities, your classrooms. The conservation biology paper I cited earlier included a line that I keep coming back to. The ideas for change often begin with individuals who, through small but compounding actions, trigger ripple effects that gradually gain collective momentum, ultimately culminating in societal change. So that's you, that's all of us, because inclusive conservation isn't about adding a photo of a local community member to an annual report. It's not about a paragraph in a grant application about stakeholder engagement, and it's not about symbolic gestures. It's about fundamentally rethinking who holds power and then using this power to empower others. And this is a quote that I want to leave with you. Conservation is fundamentally an exercise of multi-dimensional power. The question is not whether power will be exercised, but by whom and for whose benefit. And this is a quote adapted from the Danish Institute for International Studies. When we isolate Indigenous people from their landscapes, we don't just harm them. We remove them from their identity, their well-being, their cultural norms. Conservation that excludes people isn't just unjust, but it's impossible. The 2025 paper on Indigenous knowledge put it simply: Western science alone is insufficient. It's based on a hierarchy where humans are above the natural world. Indigenous worldviews see humans as a part of nature with rights and responsibilities. Respect for nature as living entities. Not only is that that's not just a different worldview, but it is a necessary one to move us forward. So I'll leave you with this. One question to carry with when you leave this room, when you plan your next project, when you write your next grant, and when you sit down to draft your next paper. In your next project, your next grant, your next paper, how will you move from principle to practice? Thank you.
Hello, hello. Okay, so if you have any questions, please come here to the microphone. You have to come and line up. Thanks so much, Eugenia, for an amazing presentation, and I'm really happy that you were able to join us today. So now we open up the floor for questions.
Sorry, I'm just checking. Are you able to see me?
We can see a small you. If you stop sharing your presentation, we can probably see a bigger you. And that would be good. There we are. Thank you for that.
Okay, yeah, because I can't see myself, so I'm confused.
We can see you.
Let me try. Okay, great.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. That was amazing. Hard question, the big question, I guess, or one of them. You're talking about how people have used a power imbalance to helicopter or remote control research. But you're talking about how we can use that it still recognizes that power imbalance, but we can use it to be more inclusive, to empower, to build capacity, to enable. How do we get rid of the power imbalance? How do we remove the obstacles, most of which we have put there, to people in other countries claiming their own power, so that we're not there in a more partnership-y role? We're not there. They're doing the research. And if we want to find out about giraffes or elephants or turn up at Impala, we turn up with humility and say, can we please come and join in with what you're doing? Because we love these giraffes or these elephants. Not, we've got tons of money, but we're going to be a bit more inclusive about it. How do we get rid of the power imbalance?
Yeah, I mean, that's a super important question and something that I am always thinking about and trying to crack myself. Because I know that essentially that's where we have to shift towards, right? We can't keep on relying, we can't keep relying on this structure of power to move forward with conservation, but we have to really dismantle the structure of power so that decision making is within communities that are most familiar with these species, most familiar with the territory and the land. And I think it starts with what you mentioned about humility, and for Global North researchers to accept that humility and accept not having all the answers or all the knowledge or solutions, and being able to design research projects that don't center a westernized version of conservation, but really ask questions and enable and encourage local communities to lead. And with the example of remote control science, where Global North communities are dictating research agendas, being able to let go of that is the first step, and not withholding power from afar, but letting that be in the hands of local communities is something that I think we all have to start doing, and amplifying the right voices and not being in the center of these conversations is the direction that you have to go to shift the dynamic and ensure that the communities who know their landscape best are the ones who are leading the conservation solutions.
Hi, Eugenia. I have a question. Could you please speak to how your work is empowering young conservationists that don't necessarily follow the traditional route to get into understanding better the communities that they live in and how they can support them?
Yeah, definitely. Do you mean like environmental education or more social media side?
Both?
Both. Yeah, no, definitely. I think one thing that I try to advocate for in my work is helping younger people recognize their role in conservation. I think a lot of people have this misconception that in order to work in conservation, you have to fit a very specific role. You have to have an ecology or biology background, and if you didn't study that, then you don't have a place in the conservation field. But as someone who didn't study any of that and cares a lot about conservation and wants to be able to communicate that to younger people, something that I am very passionate about is making sure that people know that their skills can contribute to this field, and it's extremely valuable. And working at this research center was very eye-opening because I saw how all these different people came together to contribute to conservation research. It wasn't just the researchers who were doing the work, but it was everyone was contributing. And so we had like the financial department that was making the conservation center run, and then we had the HR team, which was ensuring that we were hiring the right people and also implementing these inclusive practices. And then we had community liaisons who were connecting the research center to the broader community. And I think things like this is something that people maybe don't see as much representation of when they think of environmental conservation work. And so that's something that I try to really promote in my advocacy and making it an inclusive space for anyone to be a part of, and not having to look a certain way or having to have certain talents or skills.
Thanks so much for your response. Does anyone have any additional questions for her? Yes, Paul?
Thanks very much. That was a great talk. I just wondered, from your own experiences, do you know any examples of where there are current projects or organisations that have taken the kind of well-intentioned meanings and actually done this? Are there any tangible examples of that that we could then maybe go and share?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just speaking from my own experience and what I witnessed when I was working at Impala Research Center, I think a really great example is from the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior. They had a research team that was studying baboons' sleep site selection, and they really wanted to ensure that that the Kenyan researchers were at the forefront, like leading this research. And so while it was funded by a German institution, they had an entire 7-week program that was dedicated for Kenyan researchers to be involved in the project, but also participate in skill exchange and international collaboration, so that the international researchers were also learning from the Kenyan researchers and vice versa. And I think that was a good example because it was inclusive, but also in a way that it was promoting, it was facilitating a shared learning experience and making sure that the voices of these Kenyan researchers were very much amplified within this project. And so I think when PIs or any researchers are applying for funding grants, it's important to have a component, especially if they're conducting research in a foreign country, to request a part of that funding to specifically fund researchers in the local community. And being very intentional about that, I think, is something that researchers can do to actualize these principles of inclusive conservation.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, we have Maria.
Sorry, hi, just following on that one, 'cause yeah, love the talk, really important. And in terms of, we just had that case, we got a grant with funding to pay someone in the range country, I'm gonna call it. But we've had massive issues to actually be able to pay someone that was not in the UK in this particular case. So I guess any ideas so that, I guess it goes back to what you said, it's like systemic changes need to happen so that barriers like that are all sort of logistic, tax administration are not barriers so that we could do that more freely. Any ideas as to how we can break those barriers?
Yeah. Yeah, that's always a challenge with like the international tax system and payment. I think in that case, maybe looking towards other forms of compensation can be valuable. I know that for a lot of research assistants in Kenya, for example, having official certification can allow them to apply for master's programs or more official jobs rather than like remaining in a research assistant position. And I think that was something that I saw a lot of project managers do. And that was, yeah, something that was very valuable, and maybe like identifying different forms of compensation that are beneficial and could help them advance their career. And even having like skill exchange sessions for people who maybe are very experienced at data analysis and coding, just volunteering time to teach the local researchers who maybe haven't had the same access to this education to talk about data analysis and how to take their knowledge and like their vast knowledge to the next level by being able to apply these skills. I unfortunately don't have an answer about the tax issues and how to actually go about that, but I think looking towards alternative forms of benefit sharing is one way to go.
Thank you so much, Eugenia. We have time for one more question. Oh, okay.
Hi. Do you have any experience how, for instance, Kenya work with corruption? I mean, like NGOs and local communities. How do you have any examples of how do you cope with this challenge? Do you understand my question?
Like how NGOs are coping with corruption?
Yeah.
That was definitely a very big challenge that I noticed in the conservation landscape in Kenya. And in terms of corruption specifically, I don't have clear cases of how they've gone about this, but I think some examples of successful conservation I've seen include partnerships with international NGOs, and so maybe relying on that external sort of external expertise to like circumnavigate the local challenges in terms of like the political landscape and bureaucratic systems. For example, the Inclusive Conservation Summit that I attended was, I think, a very interesting example of collaboration because it had some international funders that were like larger nonprofits within conservation, like IUCN and Conservation International, but they were partnering with Impact Kenya, which were the local implementers. So even though they were providing these resources, it was really locally led, and Impact Kenya was able to bring in all these pastoralists and all these community members who often don't have a say in designing conservation agendas. And so I think if nonprofits or organizations want to work around this corruption, it often relies on collaboration and partnerships and being able to leverage different strengths of nonprofits and the resources of different organizations as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Eugenia. We will wrap up now the welcome and the keynote session. We really appreciate you joining us, and please stay on for the rest of the sessions. And right now, we will go for a 10-minute refreshment break. So please, another round of applause for Eugenia Chow.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.